Lovely. I don't know how long ago it was, but I was at Cumnock History Group doing the talk on the square, and it was in the Market Hotel at the time. So it just shows you how long ago that is now, how things change. And when I was asked to come along and do another talk tonight, I thought I'll do Glaisnock Street. And I actually had planned this talk 2 or 3 years ago for something else, I think, and never finished it. And then I started doing it for this tonight. And it's like one of those things, it's like topsy. Once you start looking at something, it builds up and builds up and builds up. So all I'm going to do is Glaisnock Street from the Gorbals to Allen's Clock. Now, half the folk in Cumnock, that's the folk here, will never have heard of Allen's Clock or the Gorbals. I'm sure everybody here is very well acquainted with what that is, but it just shows you how place names change over the years. If we look at Glaisnock Street to start with, this is General Roy's map, military map of Scotland, 1752-55. Just depends when he was surveying the area. So that was Cumnock in the middle of the 18th century. And as you can see, Glaisnock Street didn't exist then. So what we've got is the original road from Ayr. It came here through the policies of it became Dumfries House, wasn't Dumfries House at that time. And then along the side of the Ayr, up to the Dub, crossed the bridge or ford at the Dub, up into the Tanyard and up into this area, which is the town centre. And this is the Glaisnock. And as you can see, on the south side of the Glaisnock, there is nothing, just fields. Now, when I was doing this, I was looking up Dumfries Hotel, and apparently it was built in 1715 or thereabouts. But it's not on that map, and I'm wondering if there's an error with that date. And I don't know, we need to start looking into that a bit more. So it wasn't here according to that map. So the original road, if you were heading for Dumfries in the south, you went up the town head and then right up here past Vershare and up by Craigens and over the hill and back onto the road from Muirkirk, New Cumnock and so on. Muirkirk, up the back hill, up past Logan, and then you cross Stephen's Ford and head out towards Auchinleck. So that was the kind of 4 routes. So Glaisnock Street in this corner didn't exist 1752. Shortly after that, this is 1775, this is Armstrong's map of Ayrshire, Cumnock area. And as you can see, the road through Dumfries House is very similar. Instead of crossing down here and into the town centre, we're coming right along what is now Ayr Road to a new bridge here. And this new road that heads up towards Bowland, which is currently Glaisnock Street and Glaisnock Road, heading up in that direction. And you can see the old road here through Vershare has disappeared. Still there, because there's still a farm road up from Vershare through to Craigens, so that's the original route of it. So sometime between 1750 and 1775, basically is when Glaisnock Street started, was built. You can also see here the new inn exists by this time, which is what we're in just now, the Cave of Dumfries Arms Hotel. Moving on a wee bit, roughly the same period. Taylor and Francis's maps, quite unusual. They're the long, thin strip ones. And as you can see there, we've still got the new inn and the toll, which was at the corner of Ayr Road, Glaisnock Street. We'll talk about that later. Funny angle, goes north to the right there. That's just the way the long thin strips were drawn for the old maps at that time. But obviously Glaisnock Street is in existence. And this is another route which using the same style of map. And again, you can see the road there. That's Ayr Road coming from the Glaisnock House is up on the top right. So this is Glaisnock Street. There's the bridge. That's the road to Ayr Road, and this is a road up Glaisnock Street. The Glaisnock crossed twice, which is quite significant as far as we're concerned. In a wee minute we'll talk about it. But that's how it was then. 1828, as you can see here, we've got some black blobs at the side of the road, so it's starting to get built up. Ayr Road coming in and so on. Now, it was established as a street probably mid to late 1700s, and that was the time when most of the landowners were doing planned villages. If you think of Auchinleck, Lord Auchinleck totally rebuilt Auchinleck at that time. The old original village of Auchinleck was round the old kirk. It was all cleared away, and what he did was he built a straight main street and a crossover, which is the Boswell crossover, crossroads. Right, so that was typical of the time of what was happening. Think of Catherine, right angle streets and everything else, and all over Scotland. This was the kind of in thing, planned villages. So Cumnock, for some reason, didn't really do that. It just became piecemeal because it wasn't regular streets. It was just kind of, think of Glaisnock Street the way it used to be. It was quite narrow. So it wasn't planned the way everything else was. So I don't know whether there was a big scheme to build a street like that, or whether it just gradually built up over a period of time. The first official ordnance survey maps were made in the 1850s. This is 1857. And here we have the street. As you can see, the red bits are the buildings, the blue is Glaisnock Water, and the wee bit we're going to talk about, this is the Gordon's Bridge, which is unnamed on this map, and Allen's Spot goes in about here, and this is Air Roads. It's only really this wee stretch for the Royal Hotel, the Royal Hotel up here to Glaisnock Street, Air Road corner we're going to look at. 1896. Slightly later, and if you remember the last map, this side of the street wasn't built up, right? So you had a bridge parapet here, you could look over into the burn, but between 1857 and 1896, that wee bit was built up. This side's already been built over the bridge. 1959, a wee bit more up to date, and this one here has now got the street numbers on it. Prior to that, Cumnock didn't really have street numbers. It was the early 1900s they decided to introduce street numbers to make it a bit easier. So 1959 Ordnance Survey map indicates the street numbers. So, Glaisnock Street, number 1, Royal Hotel. And the official Royal Hotel front door, we all know, is this one, as it was. And this is a few years ago, obviously, because it's a Royal Hotel entrance and reception. I started this talk a wee while ago, as you'll notice. And I've done most of the history of the Royal Hotel, and I did the square, because it's basically the last number as you get around the square. So we'll not mention the Royal Hotel too much. The initials RB, Robert Barrowman. It was him that built it, and it's probably about 1890, 1892. Robert might be able to confirm if there is anything, any evidence of an exact date, or even an architect, because I've never been able to pinpoint either. But it's certainly roughly 1890 is what they tend to think. And obviously it replaced an older hotel that was there in pub, etc. It was elaborated and built up at that time. Number 3 was the shop underneath the Royal Hotel. Before the Royal Hotel was rebuilt, it was just a shop premises. And over the years, it's been a variety of things. So just to remind you of all the shops were, roughly 1895, it was William Drummond's Grocery. And it was then taken over by Adam Drummond, who was an ironmonger, and he closed down in 1890. 1890, George Macmillan, who established his business in 1866, opened up a wee bookshop and a stationer's there. And it then was Howitt's Confectioners, Lorimer's Tailors, the Mrs. Irving's Confectioners, then the Mrs. Hutchison's, who had a drapery and a goods menagerie. Samuel Jackson had a drapery. Miss Jackson then took over in the 1920s. And then in 1964, it became Stevenson's Bakery shop. In more recent years, it's been a variety of things. Arc Joinery was in it, and I believe, if I'm 100% correct, it's now the downstairs toilets in the Royal. So that was number 3. Number 5, a well-known name in Cumnock, McGavin was the baker. John McGavin established his business in 1837. Now, that building looks about that style, early 1800s. It's a kind of Flemish style gable. Obviously it's not there anymore, it's now part of the car park for the Royal Hotel. But the gable there was quite significant in Cumnock in those days. It seemed to be 2 or 3 of them, and there was a group of them further along the street. If you look at the really old images of it though, these gables are just normal gables. So there must have been a period when they decided to rebuild it and make it a bit fancier. So John McGovern Senior and then John McGovern Junior ran it as a bakery, and the baker's shop there closed in 1961. I don't think I remember that building. I was born in 64, so I'm assuming it was demolished before. Right, so maybe somebody can confirm that. But obviously, that's a photograph when it was probably halfway coming down. And obviously, everybody here knows about Cumnock tarts, and McGovern claimed to be the original Cumnock tart maker before it was passed on to a variety of folk. And they now make them in new Cumnock, but never mind. Aye, just aside of it. But there was other buildings there before. I think they were demolished. Aye.
I can remember when I was still trading.
Right, when was that?
Yeah, that would be 50s.
Aye, as I say, 61 was what I've got here. So, John McGovern, the senior, died in 1925, and he lived in a house called Beach Bank in Ayr Road. Up the close next to McGovern's was actually one of two wee businesses. William Boyd was an ironmonger and he made beds. So I think that was somebody's workshops up the closes and stuff like that. Right, we're now moving on to number 7, which is actually the downstairs part of the Craighead Inn, as it was, and at one time it was actually a wee shop. In up to 1879, Mrs. Brackenridge was a cloth merchant. Now, I don't know if that's the same Brackenridge as Brackenridge and Henderson, or Breckenridge, but it might have been. Certainly by 1882, so I'm guessing it's just about 1880 when she shut down. John Andrew, he actually opened the new Apothecaries Hall in that there, and that was basically a chemist. But he was also well known for making Andrew's aerated waters, which was Cumnock's equivalent to Curry's lemonade, until Curry's kind of took over and became a bigger outfit and bought these different chemists. But it used to be the chemists that would make your fizzy waters and fizzy juices and stuff like that. So Andrew's ginger beer and stuff like that. I believe it had a wee workshop down in the Tanyard, because obviously the wee building underneath the Craighead wasn't very big. John Andrew, he was a provost of Cumnock between 1899 and 1902. And when I was doing this, I think there were about 5 different provosts had the premises in that wee short stretch of Glaisnock Street. By 1910, it was James Davidson the saddler, and you quite often see old photographs indicating that. And then the business was taken over by Mrs. Jeanie Davidson, who died in 1929. And then it was taken over by probably their son, John Davidson, who died in 1962 as a saddler. Mrs. Lees latterly had it as a china shop. And then by the 60s, it was definitely part of the Craighead Inn, possibly a wee bit earlier than that. And there's Davidson advert there. Craighead Inn itself, obviously quite a kind of well-known historic building. The original lease for it was drawn up on the 20th of March 1722, which technically would make it more up to date than here, so I think the date for here is wrong. At which time the rent apparently for a year was £21, plus 2 hens in January or February, and you had to send 2 loads of coal to Loch Norris House, which was precursor to the Priest House, every year. By 1915, the local fire brigade kept their fire cart up the wee close there, and apparently in the early 1900s, it used to sell its own Craighead blend of Old Highland malt whisky. Now, that was quite a common thing with a lot of pubs and stuff like that. You'd have their own blend and label it. And one of the more famous blends in Cumnock was Cosgelliach blend, or Cosgelliach, after the hill above between Cumnock. But through a different kind of connection, I discovered that Cosgelliach blend was Johnny Walker's house relabelled. It wasn't actually, it wasn't made here. There's never a whiskey place or anything like that, but that was just it. So these wee places just made it themselves and labelled it up and sold it. Earliest landlords I've got for the Craighead, William Ramsay, then Gillian Ramsay. 1818, John Baird was in it, Andrew Cook, James Miller. Right up to about 1914, it was John Baird's trustees, so obviously he probably owned it, and different managers or landlords or whatever else in it. Matthew Riggins was the manager at the start of the First World War, John Reid, and so on, and obviously over the years it's changed. When I was a boy, it was all white, or painted and rough cast it, but I've stripped it back to the natural stone, probably it looks a lot better. And there's an earlier image of it, probably before the rough cast went on, to be honest with you. Up the close, obviously no part of Glaisnock Street, but one of the kind of older wee bits of Cumnock, quite interesting. Up at the back there, that was actually Freddie Williams' bookmakers at one time. And when I was a wee boy going to Green Mill, I wrote a story about that wee house because I said the gobbler lived there, but it was actually the cobbler. But it looked like a G. So that was one of my primary Green Mill primary stories. Number 19, the gable end facing here, and obviously side onto the edge of Townhead Street. Early on was James Moody, the grocer, that was roughly 1914, and then David McCulley took over. Macmillan was a painter based there, and then by the 1960s it was a fishmonger, and it was a fishmonger for many years that I remember. Now, the owner of the fishmonger in the early 60s and late 50s was a Thomas McCaughey, probably pronounced McGaughey in Cumnock, and again, either him or his father was a provost as well in town. For recent years, taxi office, and I believe it's now called something like CC Beauty Salon, as of 2024, so changed a wee bit over the years. Number 19 was upstairs, upstairs, technically 19's upstairs, and for many years it's Mary's Fabric Shop, which probably all know that. And then number 21 is, everybody knows it as McCubbin's Corner, but technically, wait to see, it's not called that, it's Samson's land, because it was built by the Samsons. And it was probably one of the first ones that was built over the river, as you can see, because you also Glaisnock's in behind it. It was demolished in 1979. So when I was going to Green Mill at that time, I used to watch all these things, so I was aware of that. So to start with, it was, as I say, it was known as Samson's Land, and John Samson was a grocer and cheese merchant. His son was George Samson, and he became the provost of Cumnock as well between 1881 and 1887. He was born in 1840. And his father was a snuff box maker, gave that up and the business went down, and then he became a grocer and built that up. Married a Mary Dalglish. There you go. And they had 5 boys. He was in the council from 1871 to 1887. He was a member of the school board. He was the president of the curling club in Cumnock in 1876. And as I say, this is where he established the kind of bigger business. He actually made enough money that he lived in Broom Hill House, which is at the back of the graveyard, up the Bar Hill, Bank Avenue. But unfortunately, in 1894, in the middle of the night, he fell down the stairs and he died, and he's buried in the old graveyard in Bar Hill. It then became the property of William McGeechan, and he let it, or his trustees let it to William McCubbin, who was born in 1848, died in 1918. He was the grocer there. And then his son, John McCubbin, took it over. And then by the 60s, it was still McCubbin's, the grocers, because I remember going to it when I was a wee boy. And then obviously, it was 79, it was demolished.
She was at school with me.
Aye, right.
He's the last person.
Aye.
Yeah, John.
Yeah. So as I say, technically it's Samson's land, which nobody ever calls it anyway. McCubbin, just typical, sold all your groceries, so if Danish butter, ham, cheese, and famous for his teas, and the cheese, etc., etc. This is a slightly later image of it. Obviously, the shop was shut at that time, just before it was demolished, and it's all just boarded up. And it actually sat there for quite a while before it came down. Next door, part of the same building, however, number 23 to 25. 23 is actually the upstairs, which would be a house. Probably the Sampsons would live in it, first of all. And then as they moved up to Broomhill, maybe let it out or whatever. But the wee shop to the right was number 25. And in there, in 1880, was the premises of James Brackenridge, draper, clothier, and dressmaker. So Brackenridge and Henderson started in that wee shop there. By 1911, it was Alexander White's drapery. Then it became William Carroll, as you can see here. And by the early 60s, Lochie Murray had taken it over. And then by the 70s, he established Smart Tots, which was a children's shop, as opposed to what was the main adult thing. And you go, A White there, obviously White was in there as well. Right, number 27 onwards is quite an interesting building. It actually has a curved facade, so it looks fairly straight, but it's not a kink in the photograph. You can see the left-hand side actually bends back slightly, just to follow the line of the road. And when you look at some of the really old pictures, the street level, quite similar, but maybe not just the same. Upstairs, very plain windows, as you can see. And then it just had a bog standard roof. And at some point, this fancy, elaborate upstairs was added, right? So it wasn't all contemporary. It must have been built in two different times by extending it. So number 27, the very first one there, I have got in the early 1900s, it was a bike shop. And then latterly, it was Alan McCall's fruiter and confectioner. At one time, Mr. McKechnie was a baker there, and he was known at the time as Kechie, or whatever. And the Kechie Club was quite a kind of early group of tradesmen that used to meet and argue about things, probably. John Seegers took over there, and he had it up until 1902, and you can see the sign there. And it's John Seegers Baker Temperance Hotel and Restaurant, which is probably what was upstairs. So that was probably Seegers Temperance Hotel. It then became Ferguson the baker, James Blackwood, the piano merchant was there, Davy Brown, as I say, Alan McCall had the fruit shop in it. Agnes Cumnock was next door at one time, but roughly the same bit. Number 37, which was in the same block, George Scott. Originally, that was Charles Wiley's butchery. Then was taken over by Patrick McCormick, a butcher, James Murray, the butcher, and then George Scott and Sons was early 1900s, and they had it up until 1932. After that, Livingston Hastings took it over as the butchers, and then William Auld and Son of Auchinleck took it over, and then they sold out in the late 50s to Hugh Climie, or Climie, as I always called it, Cumnock. But that was the butcher shop there, and I certainly remember getting into it as a boy. Next wee shop, 39, Mrs. McKinnell, and then Christina Murdoch had a baby linen shop in it. Number 41 was a bike shop for a wee while. And then come to number 43, which I think it's just before buttons, I think, was Mr. McKinnell's drapery, and then William Bryson had a drapery in it, and then David Balsillie and Company were drapers there, and there's an advert for them. And then latterly, by the 50s, it was taken over by Lipton's. Now, this would be the left-hand shop. So that was the original Lipton's. That there would be Barsili's grocery first, and then it was Lipton's. This bit next door was a separate shop at one time, but Lipton latterly extended into it and had them both. As I say, number 47. Number 45 is the house upstairs. 47, originally a grocery owned by William Duncan, then it was John Valence, then it was Gillespie and Smith Groceries, then James Ray, and then it was James Wilson, who had a provision warehouse, which was just a grocery, and then by the 50s, Lipton's extended into that as well. Number 49, I love this shop, this is McKechnie's, especially up the stairs. That building was erected in 1863 by Duncan Ballantyne. So it was Ballantyne's before McKechnie's, and as I say, 1863, Duncan Ballantyne was a printer, bookseller and stationer, and quite a lot of the early booklets and stuff like that at Cumnock were all produced here. By the 1915 and up to the 20s, it was his son James Patterson Ballantyne, and again, stationery, J.P. Ballantyne there, shipping agent. And then by the late 50s, it was Alexander McKechnie Limited, stationer, bookseller, newspaper, everything else. Used to get in the door on the big bench with my left-hand side, the newspapers, just lying on it. And then I love getting up and we stare at the back to buy Lego. And the through sales of Lego in McKechnie's was that slow that you used to be able to buy packets of Lego for next to nothing because that was the price they were when you got them in. Great shop. But never mind, it's away. And there's an advert for McKechnie's slightly later. You'll notice also across the road at number 32 was McKechnie's gift shop. So they had two shops at one time. I say number 51 was Ballantyne's house, and on the front of it, on the right-hand side, was Allen's clock. So what happened was this was gifted to the town in 1918 by a former resident, and Allen was in the right-hand building. He was a jeweller, so obviously it was part of the kind of the business there. So he had this big fancy clock out the front. But it was knocked down in 1963, July 1963. The bus was going round the corner, hit the clock and knocked it off, and obviously it was totally gone and was never rebuilt. However, what they did do was on the cooperative building next door in the middle of it, which was facing the Ayr Road, they put up a clock there. And it was there for many years, and eventually it was actually replaced in 1990 by a third clock. And obviously that's now gone, there's nobody's no public clocks there. The kind of interesting thing about the clock, Allen's clock, was it was actually part of the business of Allen, the jewellers. But when they closed down in 1918, the clock was put up for sale, and it was actually purchased at a sale for £10. By R.D. Hunter, and he just presented it back to the town. Well, he bought it on behalf of somebody, sorry. And in 1920, it was actually revealed the person who bought the clock was Stuart Bain, who lived in London at the time. Robert Allen, we move on to, oh, Ballantyne, as I say, he was a shipping agent, stationers and everything. Prior to McKechnie's. The Allen's was in where Margaret Lindsay's was, but as you can see, Peter Cairns took over the old established watchmaker, jewellers and cycle agent in Cumnock. But Robert Allen, born in 1837, died in 1886. Originally he was a farmer at Netherthird Farm, but he took over Turnbull and Young, the jewellers, which was here, with his younger brother Alexander, hence R&A Allen. So in 1868 was when Turnbull and Young opened up in there as a watchmakers. 1877, Robert Allen and Alexander Allen took it over, and they kept it going to 1908, sold out to Peter Cairns, and when he sold up in 1918, that was when the plot was sold and then repurchased. In 1919, it was the Buttercup Dairy, and then they shut up in 1928, and from then on until the 60s or thereabouts, when it was demolished, it was Margaret Lindsay, the Drapers, women's clothing type thing. So that's the end of Allen's Clock area. If you go online and Google R&A Allen clockmakers, this grandfather clock was made by it. It's got the name on the dial, made in Cumnock, and it was up for sale a number of years ago. And this round clock here is in the Fries house, and it's got R&A Allen on it as well. And I'm quite sure there'll be other Allen clocks round about. Most of these jewellers, though, they would buy in the mechanism and then build it round about it and put their own name on it. I don't think they were really churning out clocks like this, but large engineering, whatever you want to call it. Moving on, 55 is the low double-storey building next to it, as it was. And back in the 1890s, Jean Ramage had a grocery there. Miss Patterson was a milliner. Robert Brown was a weaver, and he sold tweeds. And then his wife, Mrs. Brown, had it up until 1924. And then from 1924 onwards, it was the Mrs. Burns and Miss Patterson, probably again selling clothes. In 1931, the three shops here, which would be this double-storey building, was purchased by Auchinleck Cooperative Society, and it was demolished. And the present building was erected on that site. The architect was William Valentine of Cumnock, who actually did quite a number of cooperative buildings over a period in this Ayrshire area. It was Cumnock based, and it's Valentine was the architect. We know who that one is. As I say, it's only 1933 that one was built. It looks a wee bit older. And Auchinleck Co-op had it for many years, the Cumnock branch. I remember it being Bonanza Bike Shop. Malcolm Turner had that, believe it or not. And then various other folk in recent years. There is the opening programme of the new premises for the Auchinleck Co-op Society Limited. And the wee interesting thing here is Mr. Is it James, I think? James Morrison, JP on the right, one of my relations. So,
Dane, was that Cumnock cooperative?
No.
Is that where it was?
No. It was built for Auchinleck. Cumnock Cooperative had went bankrupt, I think, shut down by that time. And it was Auchinleck that expanded into Cumnock. So it was built as Cumnock, Auchinleck Co-op.
I mean, I was told the story that my grandmother was Cumnock cooperative went very well.
Right. Right. Well, it's 33 that was built, so it was obviously before then, but it was built for Auchinleck Co-op, which was obviously a great big concern locally because they had a lot of premises in Auchinleck and round about minor flows and stuff. Moving on, number 61, which is the double-storey sandstone building to the right. 61, although it's got two shops down the stair and the premises up above, it was actually just built as a house, so it's just got one number, which is number 61, and it was built for Provost William McLetchie, who was a joiner and builder. The right-hand part was firstly converted into an office for D.A. Adamson, and then latterly the left-hand room, which is the one with the bay window, was converted into a shop, leaving just the upstairs originally as a house. Then the upstairs was converted into a restaurant, and it was run by Miss Crawford. Then it was taken over by Jenny Young, and then she actually moved into the Royal Hotel. The house was then used as a doctor's surgery by Dr. McClure, McLean and Rigg, before they moved to the new surgery that was built at Millbank at that time. Then the Liverpool Victoria Insurance Company used the upstairs as an office, and then it was latterly converted into flats. Now, McClatchy's house was built on the site of the old Douglas Heron and Company Bank. Now, this company went bankrupt, And in 1792, John McLetchie, who was William's father, bought it and he moved in there. Now, the original title deeds for this house was issued by the Marquis of Bute, and like the Craighead Inn, what they actually had was some very unusual things in it. So when he took it over, one of the things that he was obliged to do as part of his rent was supply 1 day's labour shearing sheep. And when the building was sold and McLetchie took it over and built this, he was still obliged to do it, but it was only if he was ever asked, which I think by those times it never happened. William McLetchie died in 1907. He became one of the very first councillors in Cumnock in 1866 when it became a borough. He got 20 votes, and he was a wright and a builder. And the interesting thing about it was, out the back door of that house, he built a bridge across the river, across the Glaisnock, onto what's now the car park at the shopping centre area, because his builder's yard and workshop was over on that side of the burn. So McLetchie's bridge existed there. He built it in 1867, and in 1917 it was actually taken down. Nobody noticed, but if you get back to the 1856 or 57 Ordnance Survey map, there's a wee bridge showing, so it's actually visible there. So that there's McLetchie's house. Now, again, William McLetchie, like the other provost, he had a tragic death in the age of 74 in 1907. He was in Alloway Street in Ayr. There was a horse that was startled by a car, which must have tooted its horn or something. Unusual to have cars in 1907 a wee bit. And the horse bolted and it knocked him down, and the reins get tangled around his legs, and he was dragged for 20 or 30 yards down the street, and he died of head injuries at Ayr County Hospital. That became the end of that. Well, originally, as I say, shop at one time was Thomas Conley China Merchant. Singer Sewing Machine operated in 1929. It became the Employment Exchange in Cumnock. And then William Sloan, who we talk about a couple of months or so ago there, took it over as a China, fancy goods, etc. The Left Island, first of all. Then it became Sunny Days Tanning Studio, vape shop, mobile phone shop, you name it. The wee shop on the left-hand side had everything in it. The one on the right, originally, as I said, it was Adamson's, who had a solicitor's office in it from 1895 onwards, roughly. In 1906, it was taken over by Brackenridge and Graham, Brackenridge and Henderson, the tailors, who moved out to the square at that time, and they remained in it until 1957 when they moved to Ayr Road into what was probably built for them at that time. And in 1957, William Sloan and Company, or Slavinsky's, as everybody knows it, moved in there and have been there ever since. The wee building on the right, you can just see Viewfield. That was the Viewfield Laundry. That was a gap originally between that and the bank, and then they just built that wee bit into it, and then the bank extended into it. I remember them rebuilding it to become part of the bank at that time. The bank building, erected in 1866 for the Royal Bank of Scotland. The architects were Peddy and Kinnear of Edinburgh, and their initials are actually high up on the gable. It's got P, K, a kind of monogram high up. And the bank was closed on the 11th of October 2017, after which council bought it, wasted money on it, and put it up for sale for next to nothing. So we'll find out what happens with that shop. That there was before Slavinsky's.
Dane, that husband's granny was a niece of Mrs. Conley.
All right.
She came over to work with the child.
Right, all right. Aye. Brackenridge and Graham, 61 Glaisnock Street. Right, so we're stopping at the Royal Bank, and we'll go back to the beginning, and Hunter's Corner is the square, so we'll ignore it. We then have Tower Street coming out, which used to be open to traffic, but it's now bollarded. And then we have the building on the corner, which everybody in this room will know is Lochie Murray's, basically. However, it wasn't. It was built by John Torrance in the early 1800s, and he lived in the house upstairs, and he was a draper, and he lived there up until 1868. In 1868, his son, John Bannatyne, sorry, it's not his son, Provost John Bannatyne took over. So again, this is another provost that was there, and he was a draper as well, and he was in it up until the 1880s or thereabouts. By 1900s, Robert Craig, a hatter and hosier, and his business was taken over in 1914 by James Miller, hatter and hosier. It then became, there's James Miller, successor to R. Craig, and then after him, it was, there's a Craig, in the wrong order there, never mind. And then it was John B. Park, who was a draper, and it was known as the Scotch House at that time. After him, it was Hugh McNeish, and then by the late 40s, it was Lockie Murray, and Lockie Murray's draper, was in there for many years, and I remember it going on fire. Can somebody tell me what year it was? Was it early as that? I was only 5. I don't think I was there, but I don't know. I was late 60s, early 70s. The building went on fire, and at that time they demolished the upper floor, and it was just left as a single-storey building. Lockie Murray continued in it for many years, and then obviously it became Freddie Williams Bookmakers, and it's currently up for sale, so who knows what it might be in the future. Part of the same building, number 4, originally, again, another watchmaker and jeweller, Alex McKellar, was in there. And then after that, it was James T. Baxter, fruiterer and confectioner, followed by Janet Thorburn, a fruiterer, and then it was W. Liddell, fruiterer, and then latterly that became part of Freddie Williams Bookmakers as well, so the whole building taken over. There's I took that picture at some milk race or something like that, so I don't know if any, what date it was. So next door, Connells. However, it wasn't always Connells. Number 6, which is Connells there, number 8 and number 10 were built by Hugh Climbing, top of the Glaisnock, sometime between 1856 and 1895, because that's the 2 maps, so we don't really know exactly. Somebody said it roughly about 1880, but I'm not 100% sure. But number 6, that wee shop there, used to be James Henderson Grocers. And then Thomas Marioche was a barber in there, and he was a provost in Cumnock. He died in 1907. He came from Durrisdeer. His father was a tenant in a wee farm. He came to Cumnock in 1882. He was a hairdresser or a barber. He was a provost from 1902 to 1905. And he lived at Carco, which is a house in Ayr Road. It's a red sandstone house, if I remember correctly. And he died in 1907, and he's buried back down in Sanquhar. At one time, this was George Mark's potato chip merchant. I don't know if I just meant the chip shop, or not, the potato chip merchant, chip potato merchant. And then was Jai Patterson's general merchant. Then Mario Looney actually had an ice cream shop in there. It was a wee fish restaurant. Hugh Black sold wallpaper and toys. And then it became Connells, because they moved from the shop next door. So how many folk remember that? But Connells was actually next door, then they moved. And Connells closed in 2015. And Bruce's Nurseries went in there. And then it's now Magical Blooms. There you go. 6 Glaisnock Street, Mario Looney. That was the original Connells, which is the middle shop. Number 8. It started off as William McCubbin the grocer, who obviously was moved across the road. It then became George Macmillan's Stationers. I think that is that picture at the time. And then, as I say, that block was built by Climate, but he then rented it out to David Connell, who was a printer and newsagent. David Connell to start with, then it was Hunter Connell, and then it was Mrs. Connell. And then Cleamy's was needing an extension, so that's when Connell shifted next door, and then Cleamy's extended into it, and it's now Unity Hair Salon. Who remembers the freezer centre? That's why they moved Connell's at the time. Number 10. The date I've got for Climate starting here was 1880, so I am guessing that was when that block of 3 houses was built. And it was John Cleamy, Hugh Cleamy, John Cleamy, right up to the 1990s, and it's now level 1 ladies' clothing shop. So there we go. Right, number 12 to 16. 12 to 16 is what we talk about the Chinese restaurant, the building is demolished. That went in fire on the 16th of September 2015. Believe it or not, that's how long ago it was, and then it sat there until June 2021, and that was when it was demolished. It should never have been demolished because we all know what happened. Council has spent an absolute fortune trying to save the building next door, and yet that building, apparently, because I campaigned to have it saved, the cost that was estimated to re-roof it and rebuild it was negligible compared with what they've spent on that. And they could have rebuilt it and just made it an empty shell that allowed folk to use it for various type of shops or whatever, easy enough. But so as I say, that was when it used to be Charles Crichton, and the right hand bit was a baker's, and then originally Hugh Climby was in there as took it over, and then that became Robert Studdart's bakery from about 1897 onwards. So Crichton the baker was in before Studdart's, and Studdart's was in right up until about the 70s probably, and then it became Jade's Flower Chinese Restaurant, and that's what it was eventually shut down. There's an example of the front door of Studdart's, number 12. Number 14 is actually the house up the stairs, and latterly I think it was 2 flats, maybe 3, I'm not sure, but it was certainly converted into flats. Number 18 is the Buck's Head. I think I'm correct here. Right, we'll go back to number 16 then. Number 16 is the left-hand wee shop. Now, that was our Simpson and Sons up until 1869, and then it was taken over by Hugh Dalgleish, draper and clothier, then James Kay, draper, James Walsh, shoe merchant, Archie Davidson, confectioner, Charles Gibb, confectioner, Janet Cree, confectioner, then it was Hugh Climby, confectioner, then John McGinn, that's got the Merlin Garage at Auchinleck. He had the auto shop there from 1995, a few years, before he moved to the bottom of our hill. Okay, so that was the left hand, and then latterly it became the offices for various folk. Number 18 is the Buck's Head. Now, the Buck's Head as it stands today, big red sandstone building. I haven't got the exact date for it, but it's roughly 1880, 1890, almost at the same time as the Royal Hotel. Now, when it was built, it was referred to as the new Buck's Head because it replaced obviously the old Buck's Head that was there before. Now, it's quite, Glaisnock Street, as we said, probably 1770s, roughly, it was maybe made up, so that was probably when it was established as an inn. But we do know it was an inn in 1833, still referred to as the Buck's Head at that time. But latterly, it went through a number of names in recent years. It became the Glaisnock Inn. Locals used to call it the Dagmar because that's what was on EastEnders, right? So it was supposed to be the trendy pub in Cumnock, so they copied the name, and then they officially took that name for a wee while, and then it latterly was TC's Bar when it shut down. 1833, the landlord was Hugh Campbell. By 1869, Mr. and Mrs. Dane took over it, and they had it up until 1895. It was then a Mr. Gardner, and then by 1899, it was a Thomas Gardiner. Slightly different spelling, but I don't know if it's just an error, it's the same folk. By 1903 to 1929, it was Thomas Pollock, By the 1950s, it was Alexander McKechnie of the paper shop that owned it, but obviously it's still a pub. In the 90s, Ian Johnson and George Leishman had it. By 2011, it was TC's bar, and latterly it was owned by Trust Care International. And I don't know if that what TC stands for, but that was who had it latterly. This pub predecessor, the old Box Head, is the scene of a riot in Cumnock in 1833. At that time, there was quite a lot of poaching in the area, and what was happening was folk from Glasgow were coming down to this area, and they were poaching on the various estates. So eventually, like the Fleece House and Glaisnock and Ballochmyle and Logan Estate and all of these folk got together, and they could track down these poachers, and they captured 4 of them. They were taken to this pub, strange thing, but there was no police station or anything coming at that time. So they were taken to this pub and they were held there. And Alexander Allison, owner of Glaisnock House, he was a GIP, so he signed the document to get them locked up, basically. But what happened was a mob, and you would think because these were poachers for Glasgow, that it was a mob for Glasgow that came, but it wasn't. It was a mob for Cumnock, believe it or not, tried to get the poachers free. And what they were doing is were forcing an entry into the pub to try and get them out. However, Robert Collins, who was the gamekeeper in Ballochmyle Estate, he had a gun. It was a cartridge or whatever it was cocked and ready to fire. And somebody went to grab it. The gun went off, and it actually shot David Reid, who was a stonemason that lived at Berkshire Farm, obviously not Berkshire Houston's estate, but Berkshire Farm, and he was killed. After that, the poachers managed to escape and were never seen again. But obviously, had to go to the police, and went to the court. They went to the court in Ayr, and the Circuit Court on the 22nd of April 1883, David Reid, a plasterer, James Patrick, a sawyer, John Thompson, a carter, John White, a carter, George Dickey, a shoemaker, John Robertson, a nailer, John Hunter, also known as Hunter Downey, a labourer, John Miller, a weaver, and Hugh Murdoch, sheriff officer, were all tried for this riot. Hugh Murdoch, the sheriff officer, got away scot-free. David Reid, he was imprisoned for 9 months. John White got off in a technicality because his papers citing him to go to court said that he lived at Stepens, Cumnock. Now, Stepens in 1833 is in Auchinleck parish. So the papers were wrong, so he didn't have to go. He went, oh, that's no me, obviously. So he got off. Robert Collins, the gamekeeper whose gun went off, he was acquitted because he didn't technically fire it. However, on the 10th of September the same year, he was cleaning his gun at home and it fired and he killed himself. Oh. Now, folks say he probably committed suicide. So that was the story of the riot in the Box Head in Cumnock. And that's the building, as you can see, when the building is still next door and it's still being used. Red sandstone, probably Ballochmyle, obviously. Architect, don't know. Ingram was a very common architect in Cumnock at that period, but I can't tell him to got any information on it. And there's no date on it as far as I'm aware. The building next door, quite an interesting big building. It's number 20, 22, 24. Now, 20 is this wee bit on the right-hand side. This was up until 1880 a fruit shop owned by Kennedy. And then it was D. King and Sons Drapers. And then roughly in this period was Sean Borland, right? Now, the reason I know it's Sean Borland is that sign fell down at the time. And you can read Shaw and Borland just along the top. But I haven't really came across their dates, but it must have been in about there. It then became Dougal McGeechan Shoemakers. And by about 1914, John Patterson owned it, but it was Mrs. Neal had a confectioners and fruiterers in it. By the 60s, it was Mrs. Nichol. 2012 here is the Friendship Cafe, which I think it Is it the Evangelical Church or something that ran it as a wee cafe? It then became in 2013 the Colour Room, up until 2023 hairdresser. And then in 2023, it was converted into Smith's Bog Groomers, which it currently is. Upstairs was 2 flats, and that was only converted into flats in 1988. Prior to that, it was one big house. A lot of the big upstairs houses in Cumnock were quite substantial buildings. Although in 1916, it was opened by Miss Crawford as a temperance hotel, and you see old signs that talk about the Ballochmyle restaurant. And I think I was in there. Miss Crawford died in 1927. However, by 1923, she gave up the hotel and it was taken over by Agnes Hetrick, who died in 1934. As I say, still in the 50s, it was still a restaurant and probably accommodation. 24 is Donsport, which is the shop on the bottom left-hand side of it. Originally, Mrs. Howitson's Drapery. It was then Richard Fowler, a draper, then it was W.O.K. and Company, chemist. James Spear had a baker in it, bakers in it. In the 50s, it was Ayrshire Bakeries. When I was a boy, it was William MacDonald, decorator. And if you know William MacDonald, you'll know the story of the Glengyle Post. That's the same man. And then he had up until the 80s. And then what happened was Donsport moved in there from next door, because they actually moved shop as well. And it's been Donsport for quite a while now. Number 26 is the kebab shop there. Originally, this was Mrs. Granger's Fancy Good Merchants. It then was Thomas Mabiochi's Barbers. And then Robert Wilson had a Barbers, China shop and toys. By the 40s, William Dalgleish had a tobacconist and confectioners, and then he actually operated it for 42 years, and it was taken over by Jim Stirrett, who I remember being in it. And then Jim Stirrett moved to, I think it was Pitlochry, to take over a hotel, after which, by the 2000s, it became a carry-out shop. It was Kebab Plus until 2023. And in 2024, which is just this year, it was renamed the Shinwari Grill. 28 upstairs was the house. I don't know if it's flats now or if it's still just one building, but probably flats. Okay, number 30. 1852, Duncan Ballantyne was in it, newsagent and printers. It was then Henry Gibbs, a tinsmith, taken over by Matthew Smith, tinsmith. It was then taken over by William McMurdo as a tinsmith. Then Miss Grace Sampson sold fancy goods and needlework. By the 50s, William Dalgleish opened up as a barber's, and I think it's been through a variety of hands of barbers for a while, and it's currently Teresa Guglielmucci Geraldis, title, barber, and she established her business in 1999. But it wasn't there, it was further up Glaisnock Street, and then she moved down there.
Well, that shop is actually known as William Dalgleish's first beauty shop.
All right.
Well, Mrs. had the China shop, Mrs.
Next door.
Aye.
Right.
And then when she sold up, he moved into the China shop and made that a barber.
Right.
But it was originally the beauty shop.
Okay, right. Next door, 32, is another hairdressers, Albert Lawrence. At one time, though, this shop was taken over by the Burns Inn, which extended into it, because it used to be part of the living room or the lounge of the Burns Inn. I just pressed that button. Albert Lawrence, number 32. James Tweedy was a barber in there for a wee while before Albert Lawrence. Albert Lawrence was about the First World War time. His son, Bertie Lawrence, took over, and then by 1961, probably late 50s, there was another McKechnie's gift shop. And then number 34, which I don't really have a picture straight on, is the gable end there. was the Burns Inn. I don't know what the inn was called before that, but in the late 1800s, the Kirtland family took it over and they renamed it the Burns Inn. Quite a lot of early pubs were just named after the folk that owned it, so the Loves Inn, the Loves Pub, or something like that. So a lot of them were like that, and then they took their names. As I say, it was extended backwards into number 32, it was made a bit bigger. Round the corner here, we have the toll house. As you can see, the wee single-storey building at the corner. And you can just make out on the left the gate for the toll. And over here is one of the pillars, because there was a gate here as well. There used to be a gate here and a gate there. And when you come down there, that's a sign that told you the prices. And this would be a sign telling you about whether else the laws and stuff like that. But that was built as a toll house. Quite a distinctive wee building with a central chimney.
So when did that get demolished?
That was demolished on 1873 when they built what everybody knows as Mario Looney's on the same site. I'll show you in a wee minute. Just obviously about Glaisnock Street, famous for the different events that's taken place. That's been sort of a carnival. And you can see the Temperance Hotel sign just out above the middle door there, on the left-hand side. Lord and Lady Bute at various times came to the town, and across Glaisnock Street, a lot of people remember the photograph of the big arch. I was doing a wee bit of research into the arches. Apparently, when that was put up, there was about 3 or 4 other arches elsewhere. There was one in Lucas Street, there was one in Dare Road. It wasn't just the one arch. Obviously, it's kind of marking off the centre of the town. But that's just you come through the corner of the square, Pinter's Corner as it was. 1973, the council in its wisdom decided, let's build a shopping centre, we want to be modern. And as you can see, McCubbin's Corner was first to go. Look at the health and safety. You put some painted barrels in the street and that keeps folk away. And that's working their way up the street, taking that side down. And you can see there, it's gradually getting there. And we all know that it came to this point. And this is about Ayrshire Cooperative by that time, which was taken over Malcolm Reckland. And even the building here that was built in 1874, quite a distinctive building, this corner was demolished, taken away as well. All because cars had a bit of a problem passing through. And that was before the one-way system, so they're still trying to get 2 vehicles going in 2 directions. The what, sorry? It's also had a tank. Various things have put it. Tank's supposed to have come down Glaisnock Street, couldn't get around the corner and could bang into it. The Gorbals Bridge, obviously. No. The honest answer is the only thing that's indicated with the word Gorbals is the bridge. That's the name, the official name of that bridge there. When they were demolishing McCubbin's here at the corner, they didn't realise that arch was there. It was underneath and it was supporting kind of wooden floors and stuff like that, because it actually came further over. Because I remember at the time when they were demolishing it, they found this arch there, and luckily they decided it was actually worth keeping. So they kind of put their big concrete shutters over it and built a kind of flat, level concrete shuttering that's all in that area to make the road, the Town Head Street and round about there. And they kept the actual arch. Why is it called the Gorbals? Nobody really knows. I can't find out. Obviously, there's the Gorbals in Glasgow that everybody's aware of. Even nobody's 100% sure what the name means. And I've got a feeling that the Gorbals in Glasgow is over the river, on the south side from the city. Cumnock, when we built houses over the burn, the folk just say, oh, this is Cumnock's Gorbals, it's across the water.
The buildings over the river were sitting on massive big beams. I've got them.
Love you. Right. Steel beams?
One of them carrying a water gate over Cornwall One.
All right.
Biggest one.
They were probably further round because there's quite a lot of this bit was extended at the back, and it was all kind of timber structures.
Yeah.
If you look on the back of Plingways and Cornels, you can see that's kind of wooden builds. I think a lot of them are similar to this bit here as well. The other thing they discovered when they were demolishing these here, roughly where McKechnie's was they actually found a well out the back that nobody knew was there at the time. But unfortunately, they just filled it in and hid it. So there could have been a genuine well just at the side of this burn there. But unfortunately, they didn't bother. As I say, 1973, put it to bits, let's demolish it, lose the character of the town centre. One or two old views of the street, just, you've seen them before, just kind of general views, just slightly different periods. And then that's your 1874, did I say? Which was Mario Looney's at the corner. It was actually two premises there, there's two buildings. We know it's definitely 1874 because the date, I think, was on there. It's actually dated. And there's a photograph taken from up here, looking along here road, and the date's quite obvious on it. So it's a dated building there. And there, Alan's Clock, which is the end of the talk part there. And there's a closer view of Alan's Clock. Somebody with a gun click that looks at it. One other had to demolish the things, so you see how busy the traffic is.
Well, let's see, yes,
Time that was restricted, what to do for Blackwood Ocean Development, because the council plans open that right up and straight, Glaisnock Street.
Right up into the Bar Hill.
Yeah.
There was lots and lots of plans at different times, because there was a plan to open the side of Glaisnock Street, that's basically still there, and build a big fancy thing right through where a kind of avenue type thing that looked onto Crichton West Church with the spire as a kind of vista. And this was all these harebrained schemes that Cumnock Council had at one time that never ever happened. Obviously, after the 73, it was demolished. The shopping centre was actually built behind it in Townhead Street, and that was as we remember it for a while. This was an image that was put out as part of the kind of questionnaires. What did Cumnock want in the future? And one of the suggestions was a village green, which obviously never took place. And then this was another suggestion for the building on that corner. You can see they were trying to bring back some of the sort of Dutch gables and things, because folks say that should have been never demolished, so let's put something like it, and wee spiral turrets and stuff just to make it more traditional. But again, cost cut back, and this is what we ended up with. And even that was cut back from the original plan. But your Dorval's Bridge arch is under this here. So instead of a big flat slab like this that we're going to put all in here, they kept the arch there. So there is a kind of hint through that. Thank you.